Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my review of Unicorn Overlord. So for those who want to cross it, I do reviews and overviews on the channel. Regarding reviews, I tend to try and get through about 2 a week. This one's running a little late for reasons that will be on my control. And my one kind of objective rule that I hold to is that for every $5 Australian that a game asks of me, I expect it to give me an hour of solid gameplay loop. It's not the highest bar, in fact it's a low bar, it's intentionally set so that we can sort of have a fair conversation across the board, across different value points. I believe I paid something like 95 Australian dollars for this, so to say 18 or 19 hours would be a reasonable expectation is fair. And as far as like, I suppose the objective standard, is it worth your time, is it worth your money? Well, yeah, absolutely. I actually haven't put that much in because there's a bit of controversy and I've run into a bit of a hiccup with this. It's making it a little bit hard to play it and burn through it at the moment, but I think it's safe to say that there is outrageously more hours of content here. If you are very much a dollar per hour kind of guy, then yeah, this game's going to have hundreds of hours. I feel like even in the dozen or so hours I've put into this, I've barely scratched the surface. And looking at the world map, it looks like I've barely made a dent. And is it worth your time? Well, okay, so here's the interesting thing. Before I get into the controversial stuff that kind of mars the experience for me, if you're not sold on the genre, I feel like I'm saying that a lot in recent reviews, but especially here, if you're not really sold on this, I don't know if this will go any real way towards converting you. It does have beautiful Vanillaware art, and it's doing a few things different, but what I honestly think what it's doing different is kind of a little bit more jarring in that it's in an overworld map in real time, not grid-based, so you're using a thumbstick to move your dudes around. You're essentially doing mouse control, but with a console controller, as opposed to the traditional way of doing things, which is, you know, grid-based, Advance Wars, Fire Emblem, Ogre Battle Tactics, all that sort of crap. Generally speaking, they use like a grid-based system, which is much more friendly to a D-pad or a thumbstick or whatever. And this very much goes into, God, is it Ogre Battle? Ogre something or other? I played that when that came out a year or two ago, and it very much gets into the you have 100 characters, customize them all, put them into little battle groups. Like it's doing that here. So your tolerance for that high fidelity fiddliness will dictate whether you like this or not. Do you enjoy it between each battle? Potentially, you don't have to, but it depends how idiosyncratically inclined you are. Do you enjoy the idea of changing out 100 units and optimizing their gear and shuffling it around? That's not really a problem here or there. That is just a statement of how this sort of game works at that extreme end of the scale. The issue arises where like you're incentivized to buy lots and different units as opposed to bolstering them. Like an example would be the unit size, generally speaking, is 2 or 3 in the beginning of the game, and it will cost you 10 of these ticket points to buy another 3 stack for your army, or you could increase the 3 to 4 for like 50 points instead of 10. Which is kind of unreasonable, especially for the first like 10 hours or something. So you're going to end up with a shitload of these little units, which then will flow over into the overworld map management part. Like I said, kind of a bit weaker because it's thumbsticks doing a mouse's job. And you will find that the game kind of organically drives you into a direction where you have 10 different battle groups, and the game's going to be stop starting, pausing, repausing, and hypothetically, let's say you told them all to attack a particular unit. Once that unit dies, it will delete their existing waypoint and they'll all just stop still, and you will have to re-waypoint them. If it's sounding fiddly, that's because it is. So this game takes the established genre and does it really, really well. The tactics part, the graphics, the art, all of that's beautiful and wonderful, but it sort of pushes much more into RTS type strategy, and it kind of falls over a little bit there. Also, look, I don't live in a bubble. I'm aware that this game is getting just praised left, right, and center. So I see myself getting dragged for pushing back on this, but I still want to speak truth. And again, I'm more of a primary PC player than a console player. Now I feel like maybe if you don't have a PC and you don't play RTSs or anything like that, this might be novel, but coming from a perspective of someone whose bread and butter is more mouse and keyboard, it's hard not to look at this and go, I see what you're doing, it's kind of cool, but it feels like, you know, the old days when you'd play bloody StarCraft on Nintendo 64. That's how old I am. And honestly, it sort of wears you down. It gets a little bit tedious having to waypoint unit 10 out of 10 for the 100th battle in a row, and because you happen to tag him to a unit that now doesn't exist, you have to micromanage that. And it ends up, if you were to draw like a pie graph of where your time is being spent, like it's more than the king's share is fiddling around with this RTS thumbstick stuff. So yeah, hot take, shouldn't be a hot take, but I feel like maybe I exist outside of the normal demographic where it's all console based. Anyway, I don't need to retread. The thing that's really irked me, and it has marred the experience, to be perfectly honest, I mentioned that there's how would you say it? I said sort of like Old English, not quite Shakespearean dialogue, but it's very wordy, right? It's very, well, here's the thing, it planted a seed in my mind where I've played enough JRPGs over the years, because I enjoy them as most Westerners that enjoy JRPGs, I suppose from a normie perspective, right? Like I don't speak a lot of Japanese, only a tiny little bit I learned in high school. But generally speaking, there is always a strange nature to the translation. I kind of find that endearing. And that's for many different reasons. It's not necessarily just Japanese, but I don't need to explain to you, but languages don't translate perfectly one-to-one, but that's okay. I'm happy to carry that part of the equation. And, if the language comes through a little bit jilted, a little bit crap, it still gets the broad strokes across, and you still kind of give it a pass because it's a foreign language translated. And this sort of seed in my mind was planted, and I couldn't ignore it, where I was thinking, this translation seems strange, actually, the more I think about it. Like, don't get me wrong, the flowery writing, I suppose you could say, is quite good, but it's kind of decidedly not very Japanese in general sort of vibe and mouthfeel. And so I jumped on the old webpage and had a bit of a Google, and lo and behold, I'm not alone with this issue. In fact, it seems to be a big issue. There has been, and I try and stay out of controversy. I only say what's going on as it pertains to the game that I'm covering at the time. I'm not a drama channel or a news channel or anything like that, but at this rate I might have to be. Jesus. It kind of kills me that all this shit happens in games and wrecks it for people like me and you that just kind of want to play a game untouched. But there has been issues in recent times, I've noticed in the news, of egregious examples of translators or localizers or whatever you want to call them, injecting stuff into writing, politics, rewording stuff to push their sort of agenda. It's quite infuriating and it's kind of awful. What's going on here though, and again, this is not my purview, I'm not a news reporter or anything like that, but from what I understand, some dudes have actually done some extensive translating themselves, and yeah, it would seem that the translators on this game have taken a lot of liberty with reshaping and remolding the language. And I find this to be particularly insidious, and this is something I kind of want to plant my flag against, because it's easy to say keep politics out of games, don't inject your personal politics. To me, that stuff's very, very obvious, and that's kind of an easy battle to fight on. What I think is actually kind of more important is the more mundane, more pedestrian stuff that's going on here, where you have what is, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate everyone's job and work product, but if you want to sort of force my hand, a translator localizer is a fucking middleman. You're a dude that punches letters from column A into column B and you change the language on the way. That's it. That's what your job is. That's what you get paid for. It is not to take any sort of creative or artistic liberty with your writing. And having a look at some of these more basic bitch translations that community members have done, it's kind of staggering, and it sort of affirms the issue that I had percolating in the back of my mind. So yes, the writing is, well, I suppose you could say good in this flowery Old English kind of way. But that's not the original intent. This is someone in the middle of it who would probably argue they're taking initiative, but what they're doing is they're being revisionist to someone else's work product, and I just cannot stand that. Just give me the crappy one-to-one, rough as guts translated Japanese to English writing that was the developer's intent. And there is so much writing and voice acting and everything in here. I don't have the examples because I haven't spent too long on it, I'm more worried about the principle. But there are probably examples where they have, in fact, taken license and changed context. And that's egregious and that's the worst case scenario, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't care. To me, you fight the battleground on the most basic perspective, which is you should not be changing any writing no matter what. It should just be a translation. I don't understand why I am the one having to explain this and lecture, but I'm sure people will appreciate it. So yeah, the writing's good. It's quite creative, it's quite clever, and it is distinctly not a Japanese translation. Anyway, I don't need to go around in a circle, but once I thought of that, and now that I see it, it becomes very difficult to keep playing this game, especially when, honestly, the loop kind of wears me down a little bit, as we sort of discussed, and it's fine. I understand there are some gamers that want 100 hours of the same thing on repeat, similar to like MMOs and that sort of stuff. So I'm not actually necessarily condemning the loop. I get what it is, and I get that it probably just wears me out more, being that I'm way more of a variety gamer. So yes, parts of that are quite brilliant. However, when you take one of the huge cornerstones out and then you sort of mar it, you kind of taint it with this knowledge, being that the narrative, which is fairly cookie cutter, there is a method, there is a sort of archetype in a way to the structure of these kind of games, to these narratives that isn't very complex. It's all interpersonal character drama at a pretty low level because you have like hundreds of different characters interacting with each other. But as far as like the narrative itself, it's okay. What's supposed to carry it is that sort of writing, and every single bit of writing is like a paragraph long, when I know that the original translation, it was probably only supposed to be a sentence long, and all I see are creative flourishes by a native English speaker in every single one of these paragraphs that I know now would not be something that would have been there originally if translated untampered. Anyway, I'm actually quite angry about that, but I don't need to retread. I've made my case, I've made my point. I'm not actually super politically motivated in any direction at all, and I try not to talk about that kind of stuff. But I do not like this bullshit, these middlemen, these people that just because you happen to touch the product on the way past your desk does not give you license to improve it beyond the scope. Do a bloody Greta Thunberg, but how dare you? What gives you the right, the entitlement, the fact that you could think that way? And I find that quite kind of insidious, that you know better than a studio that's been around for decades. Anyway, so yeah, look, it's a shame. It's a shame it's a little bit negative, but I would have liked to have played this longer for review, but at the moment, I need to put it down. I need to just not play this and binge it through. I'm kind of burnt out, I'm worn out, and it makes my eyes roll every time I read one of these paragraphs that I know. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I'm sorry if I've poisoned the well for you also, but I'm just trying to be honest. Will I come back to this in the future? Maybe I chip away at it over time, but what an unusual experience. Such are my thoughts, such is my review. Drag me if you have to, but I would hope that people that made it this far can at least see the reasoning behind what I'm saying, and why maybe something like this is actually quite bad for the gaming landscape in general if it's not regulated or at least monitored. Alright team, might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.